Mounting speculation over the launch of Kyiv's spring counter-offensive. Our other headlines: Russia accuses the United Nations of being behind this drone attack on the Kremlin. Washington calls those claims false. Fighting continues in Sudan despite peace efforts. The United Nations urges both sides to cease the violence and protect aid deliveries. And Serbia united in grief as 3 days of national mourning is declared for the 9 victims of the country's first school shooting. People are fleeing Ukraine's city of Kherson following the announcement of a 58-hour curfew due to begin on Friday. There's mounting speculation over the launch of Kyiv's spring counter-offensive, which officials have suggested may be imminent. Queues have formed at bus stations as residents, including women, children and elderly people, waited to leave for other cities such as Mykolaiv and Odessa. This comes as the death toll from Russian attacks on Kherson on Wednesday rose to at least 23. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky has travelled to The Hague, where he said President Putin must face justice. In an address to the International Criminal Court, he also called for the creation of a special tribunal dedicated to judging Russia's military campaign. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Shelby Wilder in Kyiv. Shelby, what has Zelensky been saying altogether?
Well, Jamie, as you mentioned, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in the Netherlands, visiting The Hague and also the International Criminal Court, where war crimes relating to Russian forces that are allegedly committed in Ukraine since this conflict began are being investigated. President Zelensky just said that there can be no peace without justice and that Ukraine wants to see Russian President Vladimir Putin held to account under international law. To give some figures for context, over 85,000 war crimes have been documented in Ukraine since this conflict began. And the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin back in March over the alleged deportation of Ukrainian children. But let's have a listen in regards to what the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had to say on this today.
Of course, we all want to see different Vladimir here in The Hague, the one who deserves to be sentenced for these criminal actions right here in the capital of the international law. And I'm sure we will see that happen when we win, and we will win.
All of that shall be perhaps sometime in the future. In terms of the here and now, what's the latest on the fighting?
Well, overnight, Russia launched its most powerful strikes on Kyiv since the beginning of this year. Now, Ukraine's air defense shot down 18 out of 24 kamikaze drones. There were reports that some missiles were used, but we're also awaiting confirmation on that. This was the third attempt by Russia to strike the Ukrainian capital within just 4 days. So not a lot of sleep for residents here. I spent the evening in the underground. The air raid sirens went off in the early hours of this morning. I actually saw Ukrainian air defense missiles flying over my house here in the center of Kyiv, and then there were loud, audible explosions rocking the capital as those air targets were intercepted. I was in the underground until 6 a.m. with many residents until those air raid sirens lifted. Now, this barrage of strikes by Russia just comes a day after Russia accused Ukraine of allegedly trying to carry out an assassination attempt on Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin. Now, we know that all incoming air targets over Kyiv were destroyed, but otherwise in Odessa, in the south of Ukraine, Russia launched at least 18 missiles. 15 of these had been shot down. The air targets that managed to evade Ukrainian air defense did hit an administrative building and dorms there. Otherwise, we know that frontline cities and towns in Ukraine have been coming under widespread bombardment. One example of that is the city of Kherson in the southeast of Ukraine, which just within the last 24 hours has been getting pummeled. As you mentioned, the latest figures we have is that 23 people have been killed, 46 are wounded. Some of the locations that were hit in these Russian shelling strikes were a grocery store, a gas station, a railway station. So this has now opened investigations for war crimes relating to civilians being targeted and killed there. And as you mentioned, Jamie, now there is a curfew coming into place in the Kherson region as we anticipate this could be the Ukrainians launching their counteroffensive. That's the latest from me, Jamie, here on the ground in Kyiv.
Shelby, thank you for that. Our correspondent Shelby Wilder in Ukraine. Well, Russia says the United States was behind the alleged drone attack on the Kremlin, which Moscow claims was an attempt to assassinate President Putin. Let's talk to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova, who's watching events for us in Moscow. Dasha, what more can you tell us?
Well, that's right. Moscow says it is absolutely ridiculous for Kyiv and Washington to disown the attempted attack against the Russian president, which Moscow sees as an assassination attempt against the Russian president. Moscow says the Kremlin has the information with its special services that Kyiv was behind those attacks. But in fact, the Kremlin insists that Kyiv is not deciding anything. The targets, according to the presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, are being made and determined by Washington. And very often, according to the Kremlin, Kyiv is implementing those plans without even the right to choose the means. So Russia is blaming the United States, and Moscow is also saying that the United States should understand how dangerous such direct involvement in this conflict is. At the same time, the presidential spokesperson has been talking about the possible options for what Russia describes as its retaliation, as Russia has said it reserves the right to retaliate when and how it sees fit. So we understand there are multiple options, but all of them will be in Russia's national interest. Those will be, according to the Kremlin, the thought-through steps. But at the same time, the foreign ministry was very clear, saying that those attempts to attack the presidential residence at the Kremlin should not go unanswered. They have also condemned the lack of criticism in the West. They have said that this silence by the Western countries only shows that the Western countries do indulge what Moscow describes as terrorist Kyiv regime.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Well, Russia's Sergei Lavrov has joined other foreign ministers in the Indian state of Goa for an annual meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India is the current chair of the 8-country grouping, which aims to promote closer cooperation on political, economic and defence matters. Let's talk to our correspondent, Radhika Bajaj, who's in Goa for us. Radhika, we've seen these sideline meetings among SCO member states today. What's going on? Tell us more.
Well, today was day one, and like you said, primarily the focus was on bilateral meetings between various SCO members. Two important meetings took place for China today. Xinjiang meeting with the Indian Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, and that meeting lasted for over an hour and a half. A tweet coming out later from the Indian side saying that it was a detailed meeting that focused on key issues to ensure, peace and tranquility in the border areas. There were issues around the G20, the SCO, of course, and BRICS, also a part of that long meeting. The second important bilateral was between China and Russia. Sergei Lavrov and Chen Gang spending about an hour together again and talking about ways to further increase their cooperation as well as trade. Several other bilaterals taking place today, but the one bilateral that is not happening and that has been catching the eyes of everybody is the one between India and Pakistan. It's almost after 12 years that an Indian foreign minister has set foot on Indian soil, and we know how sour the relations have been between the two sides. Both have formally said that there will be no formal interaction between the Indian and the Pakistani foreign minister. However, there is going to be some FaceTime that they will have to share, given that India is the host and will be reaching out to all member countries that are attending.
Can you give us a steer on what might be happening tomorrow?
So there are about 15 key points that the SCO members will be discussing tomorrow. While no official statement has been shared on what exactly that is going to be, it is going to be centered around a secure SCO, that being the umbrella theme for this year's summit. So we are looking at discussions around improving regional stability, security, economic and trade development and cooperation. And besides that, really, the meeting tomorrow will look at setting the foundation for the big SCO summit, which will take place in New Delhi in July, and which will be, attended by the top leaders from all the SCO member countries, including Xi Jinping.
Radhika, thank you for that. Our correspondent Radhika Bajaj in Goa. 2 pupils injured in the school shooting in Belgrade remain in a critical condition. They include a girl who underwent surgery because of her head injuries. People have been laying flowers and toys at the entrance to the school and lighting candles to remember the victims, 8 children and a security guard. A 13-year-old boy is in custody, while his father, whose guns he used, has been charged with endangering public safety. Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić says 3 days of national mourning will begin on Friday.
Danas je jedan od najtežih.
Today is one of the toughest days in Serbia's modern history. I offer my condolences to families, parents, brothers and sisters, grandmothers and grandfathers of killed children, to children and the family of school guard. Unfortunately, Serbia is united in grief.
Israeli troops have killed 2 Palestinian gunmen who shot dead a British-Israeli mother and her 2 daughters last month. Mourners attended the funeral of the 2 men and a 3rd person who was also killed during the raid in the occupied West Bank on Thursday. Palestinian militant group Hamas confirmed the men were members of its armed wing and that they had carried out the attack on the 7th of April. Meanwhile, many Israelis are staging a so-called day of disruption in the latest protest over planned judicial reforms. Demonstrators have blocked roads as they try to maintain pressure on lawmakers who reconvene in Parliament this week. The plan will allow the government to appoint Supreme Court judges. It's been on hold since March after the government agreed to more consultation. At least 130 people have been killed by landslides and floods in Rwanda. This follows weeks of heavy rain. Thousands of homes have been destroyed. Neighbouring Uganda has also been affected, where at least 6 people are reported to have died. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Blooming Lovely, the site that draws hundreds of thousands of tourists from all around the world. China's cherries in spring.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
This week on Razor, treating crops with natural fungicides by bee delivery, and creating personalised cancer treatments with some very unlikely helpers.
We can do smaller trials for those group of patients, and we will be able to get these new drugs from the research arena to the clinical practice faster.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. People flee Ukraine's city of Kherson following the announcement of a 58-hour curfew. There's mounting speculation over the launch of Kyiv's spring counter-offensive. Our other headlines: Russia accuses the United States of being behind that drone attack on the Kremlin. Washington calls the claims false. Fierce fighting is continuing in Sudan despite international efforts to broker peace. The army and a paramilitary group are vying for control of the capital, Khartoum. So far, none of the agreed ceasefires has worked. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is pressing both factions to stop the violence, calling the situation totally unacceptable. The two sides have nominated envoys for peace talks, but the army has ruled out face-to-face discussions, saying all communications must be via mediators. Well, the United Nations head of aid says he hopes to hold face-to-face meetings with Sudan's warring parties after visiting the country. Martin Griffiths has called on both sides to guarantee safe passage of humanitarian aid after 6 aid trucks were looted. Despite the continued fighting, both the army and the RSF claim they are committed to a humanitarian truce. Well, let's talk now to David McDonald, the country director for CARE International in Sudan. David, welcome. Thanks for your time. First of all, perhaps if you could explain the extent of your organisation's operations in Sudan, perhaps how big is your presence and what are you doing?
Yes, at this point in time, we've been working in Sudan since 1979. We work to support farmers in growing more food. We work to support income opportunities for women. We support food and training for mothers to ensure that their children stay healthy and well fed. We run community healthcare clinics, and we also provide support to refugees and displaced populations. Overall, what we are seeing is that I would say approximately 80% of our work is still able to be delivered at this time. There is, as you said, catastrophic events in Khartoum and in parts of Darfur. In other parts of the country, they've been slightly less impacted by the conflict, and we work very hard to be maintaining services for people. An important timeline for us at this point in time across the country, Sudan is typically a very food insecure country, and we need to be making sure that people have got seeds, tools and agricultural support, so that by the end of this month, they've got their fields prepared and are able to grow the crops they will need to be eating for the rest of this year.
I mean, good to hear that perhaps the majority of your work seems to be going on unaffected. When you speak to your colleagues on the ground in the affected areas, what are the challenges that they're reporting back to you?
Well, that would be in areas of Khartoum and in Darfur in the west of the country. And certainly what people are saying, if you look at a personal level, they're suffering real challenges in access to water, access to food, access to health services, phone services, internet. Many of the things that we expect in our day-to-day lives, they just cannot access this anymore. People in Sudan are extremely resilient, but these latest clashes have really pushed that resilience beyond the point that it can sustain them, and they are crying out for help and assistance. But we do, as you mentioned at the start of this interview, we really need meaningful commitments to a ceasefire by all sides involved in this conflict. We need to be ensuring that we've got safe access to communities for humanitarian assistance, and we need to make sure that we've got corridors and financial means to be delivering that assistance to some of the most vulnerable populations in the world at this time.
David, which supplies are most in need and what are the worst shortages?
We've suffered for some time now, even pre this crisis, we suffered with medical supplies. So medicines are very much needed. Obviously, the medical facilities, they're struggling to maintain continuous services to the population. I think many people are now struggling to access cash. And I hear many agencies now just working extremely hard around the clock to make sure that people have got the money they need and to keep banking services open. Shops are open periodically in Khartoum, but widespread looting means that many of those shops don't have the goods that people would be looking for there. And I think, as I say, we are extremely concerned, both in the short term, but when we look medium to long term, about making sure that people have got enough food to eat. In a good year, approximately 1/4 of the population of Sudan go hungry. And this is so far from being a good year at this point in time that we are extremely concerned about how this will play out.
David, good to talk to you. Good luck with your work, and thanks very much for your time. David McDonald, the Country Director for CARE International in Sudan. The European Central Bank has increased its benchmark interest rate by another 0.25% as it tries to fight inflation. It brings the current deposit rate to 3.25 and comes after Eurozone inflation rose to 7% last month, more than triple the ECB's 2% target. Today's increase is the European Central Bank's 7th in a row since last July. The dollar fell on Thursday after the United States Federal Reserve raised interest rates yet again, but signaled that it could be the last rise in this current cycle. It pushed the base rate up by 0.25% to 5.25%. That's the highest in 16 years. But unlike previous announcements, the Fed did not say it anticipates further hikes. Most traders took that as a sign that rates have peaked, at least for now. Shell made record profits of $9.6 billion in the first 3 months of this year, despite a recent fall in global energy prices. It's the latest oil giant to announce huge profits, sparking anger over high bills faced by customers. Consumer groups say falling costs are not being passed on quickly enough. Shell says the strong results are down to better trading performance and declining operating expenses. The impact of climate change is becoming more visible. In some places where extreme weather is part of life, global warming is having a bigger impact. They include the largest indigenous Indian reservation in the United States. Our correspondent Alistair Baverstock reports.
Navajo Nation, America's largest indigenous reservation, an arid region even larger than some US states. Home to 200,000 people, this part of the US Southwest has been designated tribal land since the end of the Navajo Wars and the signing of a treaty in 1868.
The United States government said that place is a wasteland. It's an extreme environment. There's harsh conditions there. And that's how, to this day, we're still here.
Now, 150 years on, the changing global climate is hitting the Navajo hard.
People are very sensitive to the weather. And
Brian Klimowski is a meteorologist for the National Weather Service.
The reservation lands of northeast Arizona sit in a dry part of Arizona. So any changes in the climate can have an amplified impact over that area because they're already quite dry. We've seen decreases in the water table. We've seen, let's say, 1 to 3 degrees of warming over the past 50 years up over the Navajo reservation.
For the Navajo, who have lived on these lands for thousands of years, it's a worrying trend.
So we came from Mother Earth, from Father Skies, and we're the children in between.
Verlina Hale is a Navajo elder who has watched the changing climate with concern.
It's been changing significantly, and there's less water. And I notice in the ground itself, it's like drying up, and it's creating erosion. Usually we would get our snow around September, but now we see our winter until in December, the latter part of December. So that's how I know it's changing.
Many of North America's indigenous people see the changing climate as another long-term impact of colonialism.
That's where Mother Earth and Father Sky are angry. And we're in the middle, like I said, the children, because of all the commotion on the American side.
Though they hold full rights as American citizens, the Navajo have long attempted to maintain their cultural identity and traditions by living apart from the rest of the US. Now the changing weather is making that challenge even greater. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Navajo Nation.
Now, after a long winter, the trees are a sight for sore eyes. At this time of year, a colourful visual feast draws hundreds of thousands of tourists to China. The cherry blossoms are in full blossom, and it's a spectacular sight to behold, not least in the city of Dalian, where traditional dancing and music add to the occasion. Our correspondent Jiang Saran reports.
Traditional dancing under the blossoms. The 15th Dalian Cherry Blossom Festival in northeastern China's Liaoning province kicked off during the Labor Day holiday.
This dance is adapted from the dance drama Confucius. We want to present the story of 7 girls strolling and picking flowers in a cherry garden. The classical dance genre originates from China. I'm proud to learn and perform the style.
The festival is one of the best places to get a sense of the recovery of China's consumer market. Visitors wearing traditional Chinese costumes are here to promote cultural heritage and to experience a sense of time travel during the holiday season.
I grew up in Dalian. My parents used to take me here, and I visit the festival with friends almost every year. I'm wearing hanfu today to take pictures and share them on social media. The costume is part of our traditional culture. I believe my family and friends will praise the beauty of the dress and the cherry garden.
This year, the festival is encouraging visitor participation and interaction, looking to promote culture and tourism in Lushunkou district of Dalian City.
We provide diverse activities and performances inspired by traditional culture and poetry. There are also night tours, camping sites, as well as tea ceremonies. We offer tourists an experience that integrates tourism, atmosphere, culture, and leisure. The presence of singers, influencers, and bands will also spice up the festival.
We carried out a series of cultural tourism events with Shandong province to further boost the market. We launched a cherry blossom themed cruise ship which sails to Changdao Island. We also began offering cross-sea packages with Penglai district with 50% off tickets or free admission to more than 10 sites. In the future, branding is of greater importance for us to boost tourism.
The Cherry Blossom Festival is said to have attracted around 20,000 visitors a day and will run until mid-May. Zhang Xiran, CGTN, Dalian City.
The headlines again. People flee Ukraine's city of Kherson following the announcement of a 58-hour curfew. There's mounting speculation over the launch of Kyiv's spring counter-offensive. Our other headlines: Russia accuses the United States of being behind the drone attack on the Kremlin. Washington calls the claims false. And Serbia united in grief as 3 days of national mourning is declared for the 9 victims of the country's first school shooting. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
today's World Insight, up close with China's Generation Z, living with cutting-edge technology, who are themselves pushing high-tech boundaries such as artificial